Hi everyone, welcome back to edX Pixel Expo 8 monthly webinar global webcast September series. So what happened is that at the end of every 8th of the month, this is where we get together and over a united cause, which is to bring our love for diving and also the oceans. I hope you enjoyed the earlier session on the dive media that happened just like 20 minutes ago. And for this particular session, right now, we are going to talk about underwater photography, tips and tricks with Mathieu Meur. I hope I got his name right. Just to share with everyone who's Mathieu is, he has been capturing the beauty of the underwater world for over 30 years. A true pioneer, he was one of the early adopters and promoters of digital technology for underwater photography, authoring the first party digital underwater photography specialty course in the world during 2001. Mathieu went on to contribute regular columns on photography techniques to dive and also photography publications. While in 2004, Mathieu co-authored an essential guide to digital underwater photography with Michael Au that looks into the techniques associated with shooting digital underwater. The book was such a great hit and that they had to do an updated version of it in 2005. So following to the success of this introductory book, Mathieu went on to co-author an advanced guide to digital underwater photography in 2007. Mathieu also published a comprehensive and interactive ebook on underwater digital photography, complete digital underwater photography in 2013 and a revised edition in 2020. And another title, Everything on Underwater Photography in 2014. Mathieu is a regular speaker at dive events and also a judge at underwater photography competition and also a coach at underwater photography workshops. Herewith, I can't wait to pass the session over to Mathieu so that he can tell us all the fantastic thing about digital underwater photography. Herewith, over to you.
Thanks, Nora. Hi, everyone. As Nora mentioned, I've been shooting underwater for a very, very long time, for several decades. And what I've tried to do for today's session is to distill those 30 odd years of shooting underwater into 10 very neat tips and tricks to help you improve your underwater photography and push it to the next level. It's a very condensed version of a course that I normally do over several days, but this is just to give you a taste of what to expect. The first tip I would like to highly advise is that you should know your equipment in and out. And I've tried to illustrate this through a few different photos. So this is a simple reef scene captured in Raja Ampat a few years back. And what needs to be done to capture such a scene is that you very quickly, looking into the sun, very quickly you need to change your shutter speed. So you need to know your equipment, be able to feel the buttons, know exactly where each control is, change the shutter speed to a high speed to capture the sunburst and freeze the scene. Conversely, shooting macro or super macro, this is really, really tiny. I mean, you're talking about just a few millimeters. In order to get the depth of field, you would need to change the shutter speed to something very, very small. A very small shutter speed will give you the depth. And so again, you need to know your equipment. You need to be able to make the adjustments on the fly very quickly. You don't want to waste time fiddling with your camera, trying to figure out where is this button, where is this switch, and where is this knob. In scenes like this, which is bright sun, very shallow, sometimes controlling the shutter speed and the aperture is not enough. You may need to tweak the ISO, close down the ISO to avoid saturating the scene and making it overly bright. So you need to really it's not that many controls. The shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO. These are the sort of basic controls, and then you will be able to do this kind of images and think about it and say, okay, how different can I make it if I just change my shutter speed to something very, very slow instead of the typical black background that you see in the vast majority of macro images. You can get a blue background, which is quite different and gives a different perspective, probably closer to what your eyes see, actually. Very often when you shoot macro and you show the black background, people will tell you, oh, you're shooting this at night. It's like, no, it's just the shutter speed and the aperture that cause this effect. And you can imagine when you're diving in caves or in wrecks, in kind of stressful situations where time is limited, you really don't want to be figuring out what switch, which button do I need to touch. So you need to be able to do this very quickly on the fly. Don't waste time underwater. And in terms of not to waste time underwater, another good advice is you should practice in the pool. Time in the pool is free or it's very cheap. Whether it's equipment you've had for a while, whether it's equipment that you just purchased, practicing different kinds of shot underwater, whether it's macro, whether it's wide angle, practicing with models, making sure they're looking at you, they understand the signs. All these are very, very useful things to practice in a pool while you have time, while you can really rehearse and spend time trying different settings and different poses, for example, except maybe sometimes the models will not listen and they're busy doing other things like what you see on this image. Another tip, the second tip for today would be know your subjects. It's very, very important. We all love the sea, as Nora said. We all love the sea. That's one of the reasons we want to take photos of it, to capture it, to remember it, to share it with friends and family. And knowing what subject you can find in which area or in which subpart of a reef or in which ecosystem really makes a difference. And certain types of sea slugs, for example, certain types of nudibranchs will be found on certain substrates because that's their food source, or that's where they would naturally be found. And so these are things that are quite nice to know, because then you can look for the subjects in a very specific area rather than wasting time. And very often you will notice that they, especially when it comes to sea slugs, they tend to feed and grow on media that have a similar coloration to them. The same thing goes for many, many different types of subjects, where, again, knowing where to look for certain subjects, or conversely, if you see certain things, knowing what to look for on these substrates would really save you time and allow you to identify the subject very quickly. And then rather than spending a lot of time looking for the subject, you can spend time getting the image that you want, with the lighting effect that you want, with the composition that you want, with the attitude of the subject that you want. This image illustrates one classic one, which is you see the eggs on the bottom right of the image. And you would very often know that damselfish and clownfish, they are aggressive when they are protecting their eggs. So if you see clownfish or damselfish that are exceptionally protective or exceptionally aggressive, just to pull back a little bit and just observe all around. And very often near the anemone or on a rock, on a piece of the reef, you would find the eggs. So this is a way to really boost your shots and maximize your chances of capturing something special. Sea turtles, we know they have to go back to the surface to breathe. So if you see a turtle going to the surface, don't give up. Just wait a while. It's probably just going to go to the surface to take a breath. It's going to come back down and give you a very nice shot opportunity on the way down. Cleaning stations as well, certain animals, in fact, many fish, many rays, sharks as well. They like to go to cleaning stations to get rid of parasites, to get a bit of a makeover. And this photo captured in in Cocos Island, for example, in Costa Rica, illustrates this perfectly. The hammerhead sharks are all in the deeper part, near the bottom, but regularly they come up near the cleaning stations a little bit shallower. So if you're posting yourself, unobtrusively close to the cleaning stations, you will have the chance to capture these animals in either interesting animals or more common ones in a nice pose or in a nice attitude. It's the same thing with manta rays as well. Knowing what's the pattern of manta rays, what they like to do, how they move in the water column, will allow you to position yourself, to capture it head on. For example, capture the eyes. We'll talk about the eyes in a minute, and get a very nice composition for your image. This photo was captured a few years ago in Iceland, and this was one of the first times I was shooting birds underwater, and these guys were really naughty. They kept shooting straight for the surface as soon as I turned to take a photo. And so what I ended up doing to capture images was to point the camera behind me and get ready. And as soon as I heard the noise of the birds hitting the water, I would just turn around and quickly shoot and compose the image in just a second before they got a chance to turn up and go to the surface. In some cases, knowing your subject can really make a huge difference. And in the case of crocodiles, that can be life and death. Crocodiles, they are aggressive animals. They are rather unpredictable, and they are pretty intelligent. So knowing how to position yourself and how not to endanger yourself, that's also a very, very good advice when it comes to shooting this type of animals. The next tip number 3, will be to know the area. This is really, really an important one. And in this time of COVID, where we're all kind of stuck wherever we are, we can discover new areas and actually find interesting subjects. This is captured in Singapore, actually. And although most people would think that Singapore waters are pretty murky and there's probably nothing to see. No, it's not true. There are plenty of things to see. There's plenty of sea slugs and different types of nudibranchs, and knowing the area, knowing again your subject and also the area itself, really helps increase your chances of securing images of the subject that you want, and of even finding the subjects in the first place. This is a very good illustration. This is one of the famous dive sites in Raja Ampat. It's pretty deep. It's almost 50 meters deep, but that huge school, that ball of striped sweetlips can predictably be found at that dive site every single time. So if you know about this kind of predictable locations where you can find certain types of animals, certain things, certain coral formations, for example, you can really focus on that subject, get to it very quickly, capture the images that you want, and then, hopefully be more successful than if you just randomly go around a dive site and hoping to find something. And again, cleaning stations are very, very good places for this. There's some places on the reef where you will always find either cleaner shrimps or cleaning wrasse. And when you go there, if you're patient, we'll talk about patience and going slow in a second, you can capture some very interesting shots. This is in Mauritius. It's a very nice reef top with red and white, quite stunning anemone. Again, if you know they're there, rather than sort of meander around the dive site and hoping to find something, you can head straight to it and capture and take your time then to compose the image, get the diver in the right place, you're looking in the right direction, get your light right, get your camera settings right. And you can get that you really improve your chances of getting very nice images this way. This one was captured in Chuk Lagoon in one of the wrecks. I can't remember the name. People tend to call it R2D2. It looks like the Star Wars robot. It's really just a boiler. But this is it looks very nice and isolated and uncluttered. But before going down, I actually discussed with the guides, understood where it was in the wreck, so we headed straight to it. What was the configuration? It was very, very close to a wall, so I had to change to a very wide angle lens, get it in the right position, get the light set up. So everything was, I knew the site, I knew what I wanted to capture, and that allowed me to be very efficient underwater and to get these kind of images. Another example here is a resort in Indonesia, in Manado, and I know they rear sea turtles, they raise sea turtles to repopulate the sea turtle population there, and they release them once a week. So I made sure that I knew the timing, I knew the place, and I was there when they were releasing the turtle. So, you know, talking to the dive resorts, talking to the dive guides, making sure you know exactly the features to look for, the animals to look for before the dive. This is really, really essential. Now, a little bit earlier, I was mentioning aiming for the eyes is really important. So that's my tip number 4. And as humans, you know, there's a certain anthropomorphic quality to the eyes. You know, we tend to identify with the eyes, the nose, the mouth, you know, a face. We like to look at faces. And so when we look at an image, we tend to be drawn directly to the eyes. So when you shoot underwater, you should always aim at having at least one eye in the picture, one eye looking towards the camera, looking at the viewer, so to speak. So the viewer is looking at the animal is looking back at the viewer. It makes for a much more interesting scene. And if you can get one eye, it's great. If you can get 2 eyes, it's even better. And in this particular photo, what I'd taken a first series of shots with a big depth of field, but you know, white fish on a white coral with the white surroundings. It was not so interesting. But I changed the aperture to a much wider one, so that only the eyes would be in focus. I obviously made sure the focus point was on the eyes, and you get this effect where the eyes sort of seem to emerge out of the whole image. And you can see this with all sorts of animals, not just fish. You know, with cuttlefish, it's the same. You know, when you're shooting a reef scene, it can be a little bit chaotic at times, like this one. But if you're patient, we'll talk about patience in a second, and you make sure that you take your time, compose your image with the maximum possible of fish looking at your image, you can get something really, really interesting. And it's, again, it's not just the animals or the fish or the cuttlefish, but it can be, like on this image, it can be a model. You know, not all reefs have very spectacular animals, but in theory, you should always be diving with a buddy. So get your buddy trained as a good model in the pool, as I mentioned before. Give them a torchlight, give them some accessories, and you can get some nice photos almost anywhere. On the reef, inside a wreck, like here. So aim for the eyes. Tip number 5, don't be afraid to experiment. And what I mean by this is that sometimes you'll take photos and you'll try a new technique and you'll try something, and it may not work. It may not give an image that's very nice. And this is a backlit image of a leaf scorpionfish. Not particularly nice, not particularly interesting. It's very slightly out of focus, probably because of the slow shutter speed. But you know, you try and try and try again, and you know, you can get some really nice results, and it all comes with experience. Here I try to use a mirror underwater to capture a different perspective on a seahorse. Seahorses are notoriously difficult to capture. They always like to look away from you. So I thought, if I put a mirror, I'll be looking at it while it's looking at the mirror. But that didn't come out that nice in the end. And you can see that line in the sand at the bottom. But, you know, by holding the mirror in mid-water, actually, this is not too clown clown frogfish. This is just one, and it's looking at its reflection in the mirror. And that one, I didn't give up, just practice a bit more and you get some nice results. So keep experimenting. You can use colored lights as well. You can put some gel filters in front of your strobes to color blend looking subjects. That can be quite nice. You can use colored lights like this is in Palau to light up a turtle skeleton to give it a bit of a mysterious look. It looks like red lights coming through its eyes. White background, red background, whatever background. This nudibranch is really tiny. And all I did was I had a white spoon in my wetsuit sleeve that I pulled out and I was just holding it behind the subject. So it doesn't need to be very high tech or very expensive. You can get some interesting effects with very cheap stuff. Slow shutter speed, to indicate movement. Again, don't be afraid to experiment. There's many things that can be done out there if you take your time. Talking about taking your time, the next tip is you should go slow. And this is a good example. I saw this big octopus on the sand. It was a white octopus on the white sand. Wasn't particularly nice photo. I just waited. I just slowly followed it. I took my time. In fact, I didn't take any photo at all for quite a while. I was just observing it. And then quite suddenly, I don't know exactly, I think someone appeared behind me. It got spooked. It turned red. Boom, I had my photo. So take your time. Don't rush to take photos. It's not always the best thing to do. This I was talking about capturing the eyes, and if anyone's tried to capture one clownfish looking at the camera, you know how hard that is. So try capturing 5 or 6 looking at the same time at the camera. I spent literally 1 hour in front of that anemone waiting. I took one photo that dive. That's it. And so patience and going slow really pay off. And patience also sometimes will also yield some interesting behavior. See, this was during a night dive, taking my time, following the cuttlefish, didn't spook it, didn't take shots, just the light had slightly averted, and it eventually caught this rabbit fish, and that made for an interesting behavior. Or here, there was a very skittish school of squids, and they were keeping the distances. I didn't shoot. I took my time. I just waited. Finally, they all lined up like what you see on this picture, which made for a nice composition. I had maybe 2 or 3 shots before they moved in the distance. For this one, I call it my magic carpet. I was observing this flatworm on the reef. I saw it hitting a fire coral. It obviously didn't like the experience. I just waited for a while and it just shot up in the water in front of me. And while it was kind of swirling and floating down, I managed to capture this image. And on this reef in the Philippines, in Walbal, same thing. I was observing this pair of turtles. There was one a little bit behind the other. I was just waiting, and finally the one on the right decided to swim off, and that made a very nice composition with one on the bottom left, one on the top right. Very pleasant reef scene. Now, if you've listened to everything I've said so far, you should know that lighting composition is something that you should be able to master through going slow, through practicing in the pool, through knowing your camera. And that's when you want to try and capture the action. Like here, a pair of little gobies that are looking after their eggs on a sea squirt, fish yawning. This you see from time to time. The scorpionfish family, the frogfish, a lot of the cods as well. A lot of the fish like to yawn for some reason, and sometimes rather than moving on, you just wait a while. You can observe this kind of behavior. Shooting sharks can be exhilarating as well, and we may be tempted to just, swim after them and grab a photo at all costs. But if you wait a while, sometimes you'll capture some interesting behavior. It's easy to give up also when you're looking at those gobies and the little shrimps in the hole. the little blind shrimps. But if you're patient, you take your time, you got your settings ready, you may only get one chance to capture a behavior. All these shots, typically, they're just one chance, one chance, one chance. You don't get two. Very skittish animals, but if you have your technique right and you're ready, then you'll get the shot. This is a very good example of being ready. I had my camera on the boat. I tested it out. I made sure all the settings were okay. I did a backflip. I went down 1 meter, and this octopus was coming down in front of me. So my camera was ready, managed to get the shot, and then it just went off in the distance. And same here for these whale sharks in Indonesia. You have to make sure you're ready to capture the action exactly at the right time. A minute before, there's no funnel. A minute after, there's no funnel. So a funnel of water going into their mouth. The next advice, the next tip would be strive to be different. Lots and lots of people take photos nowadays underwater. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, that was not the case, but nowadays that is. So just try and be different. So this is in a very famous dive site called The Passage, and everybody was shooting sea fans, but instead I was looking up. I was fascinated by this super flat, super clear water. It was slack tide, so the water surface was very flat, no wind. And I managed to capture this image very close to the surface, which I find quite nice. A baby or a juvenile batfish, it's very nice, but it's kind of blending with the background. By delicately putting myself between the background and the fish, I could grab it against the water, and by having the right setting, just capture this kind of mysterious outline of the fish instead of a very cluttered image like this one. Again, this is in a mangrove. I think that might have been in Cuba, and everybody was trying to focus on other things like, I don't know, crocodiles and whatnot. But I was really intrigued by the lionfish hunting in the mangrove, and captured this light filtering through the leaves. It's a very, very interesting moment. On a course, when I was teaching one course, we chanced upon these eggs of the cuttlefish eggs, and everyone had a photo like this one. And I thought, I can't. I'm the teacher. Certainly, I can't go back and show them the same photo they all have, right? So instead, I backlit the subject, and that was the one that clinched it. That was different. That was nicer than the rest. And during a competition, this one was in Lambay Straits. I recall this photographer. I think he was from Austria, and he was hogging a rhinopias, which you see on the screen. And I think he took 100 photos or 200 photos of the rhinopias. The fish didn't move, he didn't move, the camera didn't move, the strobes didn't move, so he must have 100 times the same photo. And instead, I just came from the side and took that photo of him taking the fish with a reflection dome, and I thought that was much nicer than just the fish on its own. So strive to be different. Penultimate tip: use the digital darkroom. With the digital cameras and software that we have, using the digital darkroom to enhance your shot is something that you should learn to do. It's not difficult, and you can do anything from managing backscatter, or in this case, it's not even backscatter, it's actually particles flying in the water. There was a lot of sand flying, and you can see the before, the after, before, after. Right? So that's one very simple trick. Colors, this was captured, it's a wide angle photo captured in Singapore waters. Not exactly the easiest thing to do. But by tweaking the colors, color balance, the contrast, you can make that photo from pretty average to something that's okay. I mean, it's all right for something taken in Singapore waters. And learn to sharpen as well. Your images, very often digital images, are a little bit soft, and learning sharpening techniques is very important. So you can see the before, after. If you pay attention to the coral florets in particular and the pattern on the soft coral, you can see the difference. Before, after. Right. So that takes us to the last tip. So I wrote tips number 10, 11, and 12. And the 3 tips are practice, practice, and practice. So that should be an easy one to remember. And I just wanted to share some images that I took maybe 10 years ago. Okay, that's a yellow goby in a beer bottle, and a few years later, that's much nicer. Lighting is better, the background is clearer. So similar subject, similar environment, but the image comes better with practice, with years of practice and practice. A nice rhinopias in mid-water, that's not so common, but it's side on. You only see one eye. It's kind of a flat photo. It doesn't have much depth. And then, a backlit, mouth open image of a rhinopias. That's much more interesting, much more unique, much more different. A shark, white tip shark in the water, nothing specifically wrong with it, but nothing specifically nice with it either. And then, some years later, a split shot of sharks at sunset, all 3 or 4. In fact, if you look in the middle of the image, there's a 4th one there. So all 4 sharks looking at the camera, that is definitely much nicer. So practice, practice, practice. And to get you on the right path or the right track, if you want to learn more than just those few tips, if you want to get more in depth, you can always visit my website, underwater.studio, and grab one of my books or all of them. They're all slightly different. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the evening, and I will pass it back to Nora to close off today's session.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I have never seen Singapore waters that clear. Beautiful pictures.
It's all in the technique.
Okay. So I guess thank you for sharing all the tips. I learned a couple of new ones as well. It could be easily applied. Not only underwater, it could be applied, I think, practically everywhere, as long as you love taking photos.
Exactly.
So
even with your iPhone.
Exactly. The wonders of mobile photography now is amazing.
Some of the photos in these presentations are taken with an iPhone.
Really?
I guarantee that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
You can't tell, to be honest. Yeah, they're very good.
That was the point I was trying to make, is that it's not, when I show my photos, people say, oh, wow, what camera are you using? It's like, mate, it's not about the camera, it's the technique, and the patience and the practice.
Like what they say, it's all in the eye of the photographer.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. That's why you should try to be different. See, I'm reinforcing what we said just now. You see what I'm doing?
I know. Well, once again, Matthew, thank you so much for your time and your sharing. And, we love seeing beautiful pictures of the underwater. And of course, especially right now, we can't really see much of it, especially in Singapore. So I hope you're enjoying where you are and, the wonders that you can get from, the beautiful sights of underwater photography over at where you are staying right now. Once again, thank you so much. And everyone who's currently tuning in, please do stay tuned for our very last session. And that is, of course, with Gareth Locke. And we're going to be talking to the first part of the 2-part session to A to Z human factors and diving, happening in 25 minutes time at 8:30 p.m. Singapore time. So once again, Matthew, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Bye.